Egypt rejects any forced displacement of Palestinians during the UN General Assembly. San Marino recognizes the state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly. And Iran's president says his country is ready for the reimposition of UN sanctions.
والله العظيم ولا حبة رز، والله العظيم ولا حبة عدس. ما فيش أكل، ما فيش شرب، عندي بنت 2.5 صارت تطلع.
4 p.m. here in Cairo, time for the news in full with me, Al Hamalawi. Egypt has dispatched its 43rd aid convoy under the Zaid al-Izza provision of honor from Egypt to Gaza initiative, from Rafah to Gaza via Kerm Abu Salim border crossing, despite persistent Israeli obstructions with many trucks turned back after inspections. Egypt has maintained steady aid flows via the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing. That comes as UNRWA warns of an escalating humanitarian disaster, revealing 1 in 3 children in Gaza went without food in the past 24 hours, with many forced into labor or begging. The agency demanded an immediate ceasefire. Meanwhile, the Egyptian Red Crescent, backed by 35,000 volunteers, has coordinated over 500,000 tons of aid since the crisis began. Egypt continues delivering humanitarian aid to Gaza, with trucks carrying thousands of tons of food, medicine, blankets, and water. The Gaza-based health authorities have announced that the death toll from Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip has climbed to over 66,000 and over 168,100 wounded. The Gaza Ministry of Health has reported that hospitals in the Gaza Strip have received 79 dead and 379 others injured in the past 24 hours. The Gaza Ministry of Health has reported that 6 were killed and 66 wounded as a result of the Israeli bombing of 8 centers in the last 24 hours. It also reported that the number of victims from the bombing of 8 centers has risen to more than 2,500 deaths and more than 18,700 wounded. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati has reaffirmed Egypt's unwavering stances on regional and global issues, stressing that there can be no Middle East stability without a sovereign Palestinian state. Addressing the UN General Assembly, he rejected any forced displacement of Palestinians, warned of looming regional collapse under Israeli aggression, and urged greater humanitarian aid for Gaza. He highlighted Egypt's mediation with the US and Qatar towards a ceasefire, praised Washington's engagement, and called for a just peace rooted in international law. Abdelati underscored Egypt's role in Yemen, Libya, Sudan, and Somalia, defended refugee rights, and warned Ethiopia that Egypt will safeguard its Nile rights through legal means if necessary. Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan has reaffirmed Riyadh's commitment to the UN Charter, urging the organization to remain impartial in resolving conflicts and calling for a Middle East free of weapons of mass destruction. Addressing the UN General Assembly, he said that the suffering of Palestinians in Gaza, now officially classified as famine under Israeli brutality, violates international law and UN principles. He highlighted Saudi cooperation with Norway and the EU in launching an international coalition to implement the two-state solution, stressing the urgency of a just settlement. The Saudi Foreign Minister also addressed regional files supporting Lebanon, Sudan, Yemen, Syria, Red Sea security, and dialogue on Iran's nuclear program, as well as Russia-Ukraine peace efforts. UAE Minister of State at the Foreign Ministry, Lana Nasiba, has reaffirmed the two-state solution as the cornerstone of lasting Middle East peace, stressing the need for an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, living alongside Israel. Addressing the UN General Assembly, she urged civilian protection under international humanitarian law and warned against targeting them in Gaza. Nasiba called for a strong Palestinian government able to uphold security, law, and stability, welcomed rising international recognition of Palestine, and urged others to follow. She demanded an immediate ceasefire, unhindered aid, and detainee releases, underscoring the UAE's role as Gaza's largest donor. She also condemned Israel's attack on Doha as a grave violation of Qatari sovereignty. Germany's Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul has described the Gaza conflict as hell on earth and a humanitarian nightmare during his UN General Assembly. He urged the urgent release of Israeli detainees and reaffirmed Germany's commitment to Israel's security while supporting a two-state solution as the only path to lasting peace. Wadephul stressed the need for international cooperation to address the escalating crisis in Gaza and called for continued diplomacy despite recent tensions.
In Sudan and neighboring countries, we are witnessing the worst humanitarian.
San Marino's Foreign Minister Luca Beccari has announced his country's recognition of the State of Palestine in an address to the UN General Assembly. He noted that the parliament had unanimously adopted on May 15th a historic recommendation obliging the government to grant recognition before the year's end. Beccari stressed this was not symbolic, but a principled stance rooted in San Marino's values, rejecting war, upholding self-determination, and prioritizing international law. With this step, San Marino joins France, Britain, Canada, Portugal, and others in recognizing Palestine during the current UN session. The move comes amid global outrage over Gaza's catastrophic humanitarian conditions, including famine, fueling protests across Europe, demanding stronger action to end the crisis. The Spanish government has joined the Hague Group, a 34-nation coalition led by South Africa and Colombia, aiming to impose new economic sanctions on Israel and end what it calls impunity for atrocities in Gaza. Announced during the United Nations General Assembly in New York, Spain also confirmed its participation in the donor group financing the Palestinian Authority alongside France and the UK. The coalition's program proposes banning exports of dual-use equipment to Israel, halting military shipment transit through member ports, and cutting public contracts with institutions supporting the occupation. It also calls for Israel's accountability at the International Court of Justice and threatens an oil embargo on further punitive measures should Israel continue to defy international demands. For more analysis, we now move to Rihem Morsi in our newsroom. To you, Rihem.
Thank you, Hela. To help us analyze the current situation, we're joined from Cairo by Al Ahram newspaper managing editor Ashraf Abulhoul. Thank you, sir, for joining us here on Qnews. Firstly, let's start off by asking, how does Egypt's insistence on a sovereign Palestinian state shape its wider diplomacy in the Middle East?
First of all, good evening to everyone who's watching, and good evening. Yeah, of course, Egypt keeps on its hard efforts throughout the years, not just now, to reach a two-state solution and have a Palestinian sovereign state with East Jerusalem as its capital. And so Egypt says that the safety and stability in Palestine will put an end to terrorism and instability in the region. And so this is why it insists on keeping its efforts to convince Israel and the USA and the world to recognize a Palestinian state, and that it is very important to have a sovereign Palestinian state for peace and safety to exist and any kind of extremism. And so the Palestinian case isn't just about the land, it is about the history and the historic places like Al-Aqsa Mosque. And so with the Israeli occupation, extremism is caused there, and the mosque is threatened. And so Egypt is working hard to stop this, and is bearing with lots of tensions and hardships to reach this.
So how significant is Egypt's warning that regional collapse looms under Israeli aggressions, and how might this message resonate internationally?
Of course, in the region is threatened and has lots of risks here because of the Israeli aggressions and the massacres against the Palestinians, and even having offensives on other countries like Syria and Lebanon. And so this, and what happened what Iran also, this could lead to a full-on war, and so the region will basically be in war and will be full of tension. And so this is why Egypt, through mediations and pressure and coordination, either with the countries in the region, all the countries in the world, the USA even, it aims to stop and to resolve such aggressions. They want to stop the aggressions on Gaza, withdraw the forces, open the corridors, and start a reconstruction, and even recognize a Palestinian statehood.
And also, what extent has Egypt's sustained aid efforts through the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing offset the Israeli restrictions?
The available the convoys show that 70% of the convoys that were sent were Egyptian. Egypt has sent around half a ton of humanitarian aid, and so to try to lessen the suffering, and they did this through the Egyptian government or the Red President, even organizations in Egypt also. And so yes, it insists on keeping on this policy to try to make the people there suffer less, especially from the 7th of October. Especially that since the 7th of October, Israel has had a full-on siege, and now the Palestinians are lacking food, drink, and even medicine. And so Egypt is working to its full potential over the month and even over the past 2 years to deliver humanitarian aid to the Palestinians and try to keep them alive. And they have also tried to resist all the Israeli operations to make them suffer and block the humanitarian aid.
What about the broader implications of Spain and the Hague Group pushing for sanctions? Could this embolden Egypt's legal and diplomatic strategy and approach towards Israel?
Yes, of course. Using this against Israel is very important because they committed atrocities against humanity, the genocide, with the killings of the civilians and starving them. They have to know that they will be held accountable, and there will be sanctions against them, or they will take it even further. And so they need to be held accountable in the International Court of Justice. A lot of evidence have been presented to show Israel's atrocities, and also evidence that Israel wants to starve the Palestinians and take advantage of them to force them out of the country.
Well, thank you so much. That was Ashraf Abul from Cairo, the Ahram newspaper managing editor. Thank you for joining us here on Q News. And now we go back to Hala Al-Hamalawi in our studio.
Thank you so much, Rayhan, for the thorough analysis. Moving forward with our news bulletin, Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati has discussed UN reform, regional crises, and the war in Gaza and the West Bank with the President of the UN General Assembly's 80th session, Annalena Baerbock. Abdelati congratulated her on assuming office, reaffirming Egypt's commitment to multilateralism and UN principles. Abdelati stressed the urgent need to restore UN credibility amid global double standards, highlighting Cairo's vision for Security Council reform under the Oslo-Wini consensus to address Africa's historic marginalization. Talks also covered peacekeeping, development, climate adaptation, migration, and financing reforms. On Gaza, he condemned Israeli killing and starvation, urged a ceasefire, unhindered aid and protection of civilians, while rejecting displacement. He confirmed Egypt's plan to host a reconstruction conference. Egypt's Foreign Minister Badr Abdelati has met UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. He conveyed the greetings of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, praised Guterres' balanced stances, and reaffirmed Egypt's support for the UN's peace and security role. Discussions centered on Gaza, where Abdelati stressed the urgency of a ceasefire, unimpeded aid, and rejection of forced displacement, reiterating Egypt's call for a Palestinian state on 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as capital. He announced Egypt's plan to host a reconstruction conference for Gaza. Talks also covered Sudan's stability, Libya's political process, and Egypt's mediation in the Iran-IAEA agreement. Both sides agreed to maintain close coordination to advance peace, stability, and development globally. Protesters gathered in Tel Aviv, urging the Israeli government to secure a comprehensive detainee deal amid ongoing fighting in Gaza. The demonstration followed Prime Minister Netanyahu's UN speech, where he criticized support for Palestinian statehood and read names of 20 detainees believed to be alive. As the military offensive in Gaza continues, Netanyahu is set to meet U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday. Trump's envoy said a 21-point peace plan was shared with several Muslim-majority nations, with talks ongoing. A flotilla of around 50 boats called the Thousand Madeleines departed Italy's Catania, carrying humanitarian aid to Gaza, where Israel enforces a blockade. The convoy includes activists, parliamentarians, lawyers, and climate campaigner Greta Thunberg. The departure follows warnings from Israel, which vowed to stop the flotilla by any means. Earlier, drone attacks on the vessels raised tensions, leading Italy and Spain to deploy naval ships to protect European participants during the Mediterranean crossing. The European Union has welcomed the reopening of the King Hussein Bridge, which was closed intermittently earlier this month following an attack that killed 2 Israeli soldiers. The bridge is the only crossing for Palestinians in the West Bank to exit without entering Israel. The EU criticized the closure, saying that it restricts freedom of movement and hampers humanitarian aid to Gaza. A statement from the EU's High Representative stressed the importance of keeping the crossing open, noting that around 25% of humanitarian supplies to Gaza pass through Jordan via the UN. A parliamentary committee of Israel's Knesset has discussed a controversial bill proposing the execution of Palestinian prisoners ahead of its first General Assembly reading. During this session of the Israeli National Security Committee, far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir rejected calls to postpone the debate, calling the law a matter of the hour to strengthen deterrence by imposing the death penalty. The bill is tied to coalition agreements signed in late 2022 between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party and Ben Gvir's Otzma Yehudit.
We're trying to make a deal so that there's no destruction and death.
Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian has said that the country is ready for the reimposition of United Nations sanctions. Pezeshkian insisted that it's not as if the sky will fall and we will have to surrender amid renewed pressure. The UN Security Council failed to delay the sanctions after only 4 of the 15 members supported a Russian and Chinese-backed draft resolution. Britain's UN envoy confirmed the snapback mechanism would be activated, restoring sanctions targeting Iran's nuclear program. Pezeshkian stressed Iran's determination to maintain unity and overcome the crisis, emphasizing cooperation with regional allies including BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. He reiterated Iran's commitment to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and denied any intention to pursue nuclear weapons. Iran's parliament has denounced the reimposition of UN sanctions as illegal following moves by Britain, France and Germany to restore penalties over Tehran's alleged violations of the 2015 nuclear deal. Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf warned of a reciprocal and serious response if any country acts on the revived resolutions. He insisted Iran retains the right to enrich uranium under international law and rejected demands to suspend its program. Ghalibaf stressed diplomacy remains open, but warned Israel and Western powers against provocation. Meanwhile, Parliament spokesperson Abbas Goudarzi said that withdrawal from the nuclear non-proliferation treaty is under review. The UN snapback sanctions, including an arms embargo, came into force at midnight on Sunday, deepening tensions in the region. In Tehran's bustling bazaars, Iranians expressed growing worries about the return of United Nations sanctions set to take effect later that day. One way or another, we will become isolated, said a local resident, acknowledging the inevitable economic impact. Another man voiced a simple but heartfelt desire of just wanting to make a living. Many Iranians stressed that regardless of political maneuvering, their main concern remains daily survival and providing for their families amid mounting uncertainty. Syria's historic Aleppo citadel reopened to visitors, marking a hopeful step towards recovery after years of war and damage. The restoration focused on repairing infrastructure and stabilizing the ancient fortress, which suffered during fighting and a 2023 earthquake. Munir Al-Qasqas, head of Aleppo's antiquities, said that the citadel stands like the citizens of Aleppo, resilient despite hardship. The UNESCO World Heritage Site was closed in late 2024 amid renewed conflict, but now welcomes visitors again. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has criticized Western diplomacy, accusing European allies of blindly supporting U.S. policies and relying on sanctions instead of dialogue. He emphasized Russia's readiness for honest talks, contrasting it with what he described as a hopeless Western approach. Lavrov dismissed hopes of Ukraine returning to its 2022 borders, claiming Russia is defending its legitimate interests against a Kiev government that he called Nazi. He warned of severe consequences if foreign drones violate Russian airspace. He accused Germany of remilitarization and re-Nazification, comparing current tensions to World War II ambitions. On economic ties, Lavrov assured that Russia-India relations remain strong, unaffected by external pressures. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke positively about his recent meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, saying that both sides have a clear understanding of the battlefield situation and are making progress. Zelensky highlighted growing U.S. trust in Ukraine and distrust of Russia's Putin, emphasizing ongoing military and diplomatic cooperation. He confirmed that Israeli Patriot missile defense systems have been operational in Ukraine for a month, with 2 more expected this autumn. Warning that Russian aggression could escalate beyond Ukraine, Zelensky stressed that Kiev is ready to defend itself and called on European nations to bolster their defenses. He also supported upcoming government talks in Slovakia, stressing Ukraine's energy support demands exclude Russian oil and gas.
Ну і неповага русських до всіх, включаючи.
At least 4 people were killed and dozens injured after Russia launched one of its largest aerial assaults on Ukraine overnight, targeting Kiev and other cities, including Zaporizhia. Ukrainian officials said that 595 drones and 48 missiles were fired, with air defenses intercepting most of them. Zaporizhia governor confirmed a missile hit a residential building, leaving several wounded. President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the 12-hour attack caused significant damage to homes, factories, and a clinic. The main focus of the assault was the capital, Kiev. Thousands of young Peruvians took to the streets, clashing with police near Congress as protests against President Dina Boluarte intensified. Officers fired tear gas to disperse the crowds. The demonstrations, which began on September 20th, were triggered by unpopular pension reforms that have grown to reflect wider discontent over corruption, rising crime, and the 2022 killings of protesters. Boluarte's approval has plummeted to just 2.5%, according to a July poll by the Institute of Peruvian Studies. A tropical storm named Imelda is developing near Cuba and could soon impact the U.S. southeast with heavy rain, strong winds, and flooding. Meanwhile, Hurricane Humberto has intensified into a powerful Category 4 storm, with winds reaching 230 kilometers per hour. Swells from Humberto are expected to affect the northern Leeward Islands, Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda over the weekend, raising concerns across the Caribbean region. A Level 2 emergency has been declared as a wildfire scorched 2,800 hectares in Serra Notre, forcing the evacuation of 2 towns and prompting military support. Access to Hayedo de Tejera Negra is restricted and travel near the natural park is discouraged. Firefighting efforts include 12 aircraft, 25 ground units, and 182 personnel. A team was airlifted out on Thursday after shifting winds worsened the conditions. Authorities continue battling the blaze amid tough terrain and poor weather. That brings us to the end of our news bulletin, and here is what we have been covering. Egypt rejects any forced displacement of Palestinians during the UN General Assembly. San Marino recognizes the state of Palestine at the UN General Assembly. And Iran's president says his country is ready for the reimposition of UN sanctions. This concludes our news bulletin for the hour. Don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok at Q News EG to always stay informed. I'm Hilal Hamalawi. Thank you so much for watching.